Hello everyone, welcome to our exclusive show, Global Bay Areas Talk. There are 4 global Bay Areas: San Francisco, New York, Tokyo, and Guangdong-Hong Kong-Macao Great Bay Area. Among 4 Bay Areas, Guangdong-Hong Kong-Macao Great Bay Area is the most potential and dynamic one. Now, the Great Bay Area is aiming to build a world-class Bay Area. What lessons can the Great Bay Area learn from other global Bay Areas? What are key factors to build a world-class Bay Area? To find answers, we invite 2 special guests to join us. They are Sean Randolph, Senior Director of the Bay Area Council Economic Institute, and Christopher Jones, former Senior Vice President and Chief Planner of Regional Plan Association. Hello, Sean and Chris. Glad to see you. First of all, would you like to share us the history of New York Bay Area and the San Francisco Bay Area? Let's begin with Chris.
The region started 400 years ago when the Dutch settled in Lower Manhattan, but the region's big growth period was in the late 19th century and early 20th century, and that was caused both by industrialization and a lot of migration from 2 sources. First, from mostly Eastern European countries and Southern European countries in the late 19th century, and then migration from the Southern United States up to the New York metropolitan area. So Regional Plan Association was formed in 1922 when it was very clear that the political boundaries of New York City were no longer sufficient for planning a growing metropolitan area in the 20th century. Just 20 years earlier, the current boundaries of New York City, the political boundaries, were formed when Manhattan merged with the other 4 boroughs to become the 5-borough New York City. And at the time, in 1898, it was thought that that would be sufficient to allow for the growth of the city. But just 20 years later, population growth was so extensive that, it was clear that the population was spilling out past the boundaries. The transportation system wasn't set up to handle it. Housing was dilapidated and in short supply. So a number of business and civic leaders in New York, they actually copied a plan that, or not copied, but drew from a plan that Chicago had done, called the Chicago Plan, which was just for the city of Chicago, but these leaders in New York extended that process to plan for the entire, New York City area. And over the last 100 years, that you've seen the metropolitan area, expand. It's now, about 24 million people, and, covers about 13,000 square miles. And it's, the largest metropolitan area in the United States, certainly. But it's certainly undergone, much, economic transformation in that time, as well as its population and land development.
Sean, how about the San Francisco Bay Area?
San Francisco City was not always a technology center, but in the last 15 years, it has become one. For several reasons. One was that many of the technology workers who worked for companies in Silicon Valley wanted to live in San Francisco. It's a more interesting place, especially if you're a young person, and they were commuting from San Francisco down to the Valley. And the companies realized this, so they started to run corporate buses that moved thousands and thousands of tech workers every day from San Francisco down to Silicon Valley and back at night. And after that, they decided they would establish a presence here in the city. So they started to lease large amounts of space in downtown San Francisco. And the result of that was you have many, many of the major technology companies in Silicon Valley also having a footprint in San Francisco. And they divide up the functions. Very much of the hardware activity is still in Silicon Valley, but a lot of the software, especially in the kind of the social media field, is run out of San Francisco. So what we have now as a technology sector in the region, in the Bay Area, is kind of like two ends of a barbell. You have Highway 101 in the middle, and you have San Jose in the south, and you have San Francisco in the north. And most of the technology activity occurs along that corridor, although there's also a lot in the East Bay area of our region. But if you think about the core, it runs really now between San Jose and San Francisco, about a stretch of 50 miles. And by the way, we don't have to do a lot of work to coordinate that. It's a natural thing with the companies deciding where they want to have their personnel, also where their personnel want to live, and then how they choose to spatially arrange where their activity is located. But this has really been a 15-year trend now of technology companies starting in San Francisco, like Twitter and like Salesforce, and other technology companies that have been around longer from the Valley, choosing to expand into the city.
It's not easy to coordinate so many cities, especially for New York Bay Area. There are 3 different states. Chris, how did your organization, RPA, endorse its development? How did the 4 regional plans guide and shape regional growth?
Yeah, it's a very good question because we have no authority. We do influence government policies, and we influence it one by the research that we do. So we have a lot of credibility for the research that we undertake. We also have a reputation for objectivity, so that we don't, we're generally not seen as an interested party in these. And we also have created networks with government leaders and business leaders over time. We have a large board of directors, many of whom are former elected officials who, just have relationships with people in government. So we influence policy that way. The first regional plan, I think, was clearly the most influential because it laid out plans for much of the infrastructure that was later developed in the region. Much of the highway network was in the first regional plan. Some of the recommendations for rail, for investments in rail transit, were not taken up because, their, investments were moving towards automobiles at the time. But also recommendations for preserving a lot of open space in the region. That was very influential. And each of the subsequent plans has addressed the major issues of their day. The second plan dealt with the suburban sprawl that had happened as regard of automobile development. The third regional plan, which came about in the 1990s, really started a new generation of investments in infrastructure, which have been built since then. And the fourth plan that we came out with 5 years ago is already having some influence on things like congestion pricing, which New York is going to have. We recommended that and pushed for it. London and Singapore now have it, but New York will become the first city in the country to have it here.
Sean, what did the Bay Area Council do to push the development of San Francisco Bay Area?
We've actually been at the forefront of that for more than 70 years. The council was created after World War II in 1945, when this was a wartime economy. The Bay was ringed by steel mills, ringed by shipyards, 12 military bases, an immense amount of defense activity. And when the war ended, the business leaders realized this was all going to end and it would have to be a new economy. And they started to work as the Bay Area Council to help to design what the future economy of the region would look like. And that's what we still do to this day. We try to look ahead and to shape from a business community standpoint what the future of the region might be. So we've been instrumental in creating the regional light rail system. We've been instrumental in a lot of major infrastructure funding projects and addressing a lot of the issues that occur here in the region. And so we're basically at the Bay Area Council a platform that enables the business community to work with local government, with state government, with universities, with scientific organizations, and with overseas partners who are also part of our economy to make it as successful as it could be. So we have about 350 members, most of them companies, but also universities and other organizations, including many from overseas. And so it's a big conversation here. It's a global conversation about technology, about innovation, and about really how the global economy functions through Silicon Valley and the Bay Area.
Both Bay Areas have main driving force. One is famous for financial services, another is led by high-tech. Sean, at the beginning, how did the San Francisco Bay Area figure out high-tech is a proper direction?
Yeah, it's a good question. There was never a decision or one decision, but there were many decisions. And there was a book written 7 or 8 or 10 years ago that compared the development of the Los Angeles area, which is much larger than the San Francisco Bay Area by population, with the San Francisco Bay Area. And the conclusion of the book in a simplified form was that Los Angeles decided to move in the business community toward logistics and the port activity. Of course, the film industry was very, very important. And companies in the Bay Area decided to move toward technology. And over time, the bigger gains, the bigger growth has been in the technology field. So it started, many, many decades ago when you had just a few really bright individuals who started the semiconductor industry. They were at a company called Fairchild Semiconductor. It attracted some smart people from New York. They got to the company and they decided they could do it better on their own. So they created Intel, and that led to this enormous growth in the semiconductor sector. And then you had, for example, Stanford University, which, a lot of universities tend to be ivory towers. We want to be only academic. We don't want to get our hands dirty with business. But Stanford said, no, we have faculty and students who want to take their technology, their learnings on the campus and start companies, so we're going to help them. So they created Stanford Park across the street and said, you go over there and we'll help you, and you can locate next to the campus. So that helped get going the technology cluster around Stanford. And then as very bright people were here, and very bright people came from all around the world, sometimes through the universities and sometimes not, many were successful. They became quite wealthy, and rather than go off and play golf, they were actually entrepreneurs. And they decided, okay, we're going to start our own companies, where if we've already started a company, we're going to become investors and we're going to help new companies start. So they started the venture capital industry. And then with the capital in the venture, and you had all the technology and the founders coming out of the universities, that really got the startup economy going. And the scale of venture capital here and the strength of the startup economy led startups from elsewhere in the world to come here to be part of that and to get funding too. So there was never a plan or a design. The government played very little role in this. It was really a series of decisions by institutions like Stanford and by individuals who were in the technology world, but were also very entrepreneurial in their mindset. I think a couple of factors have helped, though. One is it's a beautiful area. The weather is usually great. The quality of life is one of the best in the world. And it's very tolerant. It's very international. It's very accepting and welcoming of people from other countries and all different kinds of people. So it's tended to attract people from across the US and around the world because it's a very comfortable and appealing place where many people want to live. And if they can be innovators and founders at the same time, then all the better.
Chris, how about the New York Bay Area?
When you trace all of that back to New York's position as a center of international trade, because New York became the primary port city in the United States. Much of the financial institutions that were involved in investments in in trade and in reinvesting some of the proceeds from that grew up around the trade and port industry in New York, and that has developed over time. But now it's really driven by by two or three things. One is just since we have such a dense network of financial firms, this is the place where many leading financial companies feel that they need to be. And also just because we have such a large, workforce with, high education levels and a diversity of skills that grew up around these industries. And that's really what keeps, companies here, that they can hire more of the workers that they need for that industry here than they can in most other places. So that's really been the source of our strength. In addition to the fact that we're an international city, we have I think the diversity of people that we have here is really important in today's age for having people who kind of understand, how things work in Asia and Europe and all of the places around the world, and who have the personal and family connections to those places as well.
Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau Great Bay Area is aiming to build a world-class Bay Area. What aspects should the Great Bay Area make efforts in? Sean, please go ahead.
Well, China's Bay Area is a little bit different from here because we're not especially strong in manufacturing. We're very, very expensive. A lot of the manufacturing that was here decades ago has moved to other places that are less expensive. Other places in the US, maybe Mexico, maybe China, other places overseas. So we tend to be very concentrated in technology, although not the manufacturing, the technology is so much. In professional and specialty services, things like that. Whereas China's Bay Area has just a lot of manufacturing capacity in Guangdong province and in the entire area. That's one difference that I think will give China's Bay Area a different character than the Bay Area here. But I think it is already a critical global region. Back in the day before this term of Bay Areas was being used, we talked about the Pearl River Delta. And that concept has been there for a long, long time. So we were talking then, this was decades ago, about Hong Kong and Shenzhen and Guangzhou and Macau, but it was just had a different name. So it's been recognized as a major global region for a long time, but now it has kind of a different name, a different title on it, maybe with more focused objectives than it had before. So I think it's already a world-class area for manufacturing, and it will be for a very, very long time. It's really hard to replicate, just the size and diversity of the production capacity in the China Bay Area. I think there's a lot of opportunity to work things through Hong Kong, especially for overseas companies. Overseas companies like the legal system, the transparency, aspects of the rule of law for commercial transactions. For expats, it's a great place to live. There's a lot of reasons why, if you're looking at global companies, having Hong Kong in the middle of the China Bay Area is an asset, and all the intellectual assets and the startups there. So I think Hong Kong's role as a truly global city is perhaps key to the China Bay Area becoming a truly global region. So there's a lot to leverage there in Hong Kong. I think one challenge is, and this is where Hong Kong can be an asset again, is that the San Francisco Bay Area has blossomed and continues to be as innovative as it is because of the people from around the world who've come here. You would walk into a company, a tech company or other companies, and you wouldn't know what country you're in. You'd look around and you'd see people from of Chinese background and Japanese, you'd see a lot of Europeans, you'd see Mexicans, you would see people from all around the world. And until you talk to them, you wouldn't have much of an idea who was actually there. In the US, maybe 25% of tech startups are started by people who came from other countries. In the San Francisco area, it's almost 50%, 45%. So what has made this a truly global center, world-class, has been very critically the fact that so many people from around the world, talented, innovative people, come here and want to come here. Sometimes they're coming through the universities. Maybe they attend Stanford or Berkeley or another university and decide they want to stay, be part of the economy, start a company, whatever it may be. Others come through for shorter periods. Others come directly. The ability of the China Bay Area to actually attract on a long-term basis that kind of talent from other countries. That's probably where Hong Kong is a particular asset, because Hong Kong has been able to attract that kind of talent from around the world. Maybe not all technology, more financial and other talent, but it does have a record of being an attractive place where people from other countries are comfortable and like to live. And so I think there are ways, if Hong Kong can remain attractive to people from around the world, and if the right kind of platforms and assets are developed there, that that's one way to leverage Hong Kong's history to bring in that global dimension. So I think that's where the China Bay Area comes in as an opportunity, especially by leveraging what's available in Hong Kong.
Chris, do you want to add something more?
I would say that that it's becoming an even greater world-class Bay Area. I mean, I would say you already are, but it's like becoming even more of that. It really comes down to are you able to develop and maintain the international workforce that you really need to be a global city. So in New York, the biggest issue there is housing. We have to solve our housing problem. I don't know what the main issue is in Guangdong or Hong Kong, but some bigger global issues that everybody has to pay attention to, like knowing what are your vulnerabilities around climate change and making sure that those are addressed. What are your vulnerabilities around social divisions and economic inequality, so that those social divisions don't undercut your vibrancy as a place. And then the other thing that we all have to put into our own national context.
Our final round will talk about cooperation. Chris, how can the Great Bay Area and the New York Bay Area cooperate?
Making sure that we have enough common interests and develop the institutional relationships so that those sorts of relationships can thrive, regardless of what the state is of national and international relationships. Well, we have exchanges. We've invited leaders or institutions from other global regions or cities for information exchange. And we have informal networks that we talk to, for how to adapt to the post-COVID economy, for example. So a lot of it is information exchange and education.
Sean, how do you think about the future cooperation of the Great Bay Area and the San Francisco Bay Area?
Well, that's a really good question too. These aren't the easiest times for businesses in China and the U.S. to cooperate. But I'd say in the San Francisco area, and I know certainly in the West Coast and other places, there is a desire among businesses to find the opportunities and develop the opportunities that would enable cooperation, enable mutual investment and collaboration in a variety of areas. So I think you have in the San Francisco area and sort of the U.S. West Coast that kind of an outlook. The there are obviously more constraints on that now than there were in the past, especially in things relating to technology and technology transfer. So I think there are things that companies need to identify and work with or work around. But that said, it leaves a lot of opportunity. And the question, how do we build the bridges between the two areas? How do we identify opportunities in the San Francisco Bay Area and in China's Bay Area that really present themselves as strong and feasible? So, we wrote a report on this about 2 years ago and identified, a number of sectors where you could be looking at R&D, you could be looking at production, you could be looking at market development, but things like healthcare, medical devices, fintech, clean energy, electrical vehicles. There's a lot of collaboration and sort of here in the San Francisco Bay Area, a lot of activity by Chinese companies around electrical vehicles and autonomous driving. But what needs to happen is to have sort of an identification on both sides of sectors where you can do it, where there's not a lot of political obstacles on either side, the companies working together, and a relatively clear road forward without a lot of obstacles, and then find those pathways together and then develop them. Because, the San Francisco Bay Area has developed for a long time now as really a global platform. A lot of companies come here from around the world, and they've come here from China too, to be part of the R&D, part of that innovation process. But then it's a place where they scale into the U.S. market, but they also scale globally into global markets, because just about everybody from around the world is here in some way. So when we think about China's Bay Area, it's a huge area. It's a wealth area, a lot of jurisdictions. And so it's a big market by itself, even forgetting the rest of China. It's a huge market by itself. There's a lot of smart people. There's a lot of capability to do a wide variety of things, including advanced manufacturing. So I just think it needs kind of a dialogue on both sides about, so where can we mutually identify the opportunities and go forward on a practical basis. And so I'm not sure that's quite happened in a systemic way, but I think the more companies here are aware of the platform that China's Greater Bay Area offers, I think the more interesting those discussions probably will be.
All right. Although facing some challenges, there are still some opportunities for us to cooperate. Hopefully, they will have more communications in the future. Sean and Chris, thanks again for joining us. Bye. That's all for today's show. See you.